The last amber rays of sunlight caught Zara Turner's tears as she watched her father throw away the final remnants of their life together. Josiah Turner's trembling hands placed his final bet on the green felt table at the Silver Spur Saloon in Cimarron, New Mexico, and with that bet, Zara's future. Spring of 1885 had brought little but heartache to the Turner family. First had come her mother's death from consumption, then the drought that withered their small ranch to dust. Now, on this warm May evening, Zara stood frozen at the edge of the crowded saloon, her worn blue calico dress hanging from her once plump frame, watching as her father's gambling addiction claimed its final prize, her raise. The word came from the dark-haired stranger at the table. His voice was low and steady, but it carried through the smoky air like a thunderclap to Zara's ears. Thomas Calloway had ridden into Cimarron just 2 days prior, his tall frame and confident manner drawing attention even in a town accustomed to drifters and cowboys passing through. His eyes, deep green and unnervingly steady, never left the cards before him. "I ain't got nothing left," Josiah Turner slurred, whiskey heavy on his breath. At 52, he looked 20 years older, grief and liquor having carved deep lines into his weathered face. "What about that ranch of yours?" asked Sam Wilkes, the saloon owner, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "Worthless," Josiah mumbled. "Ain't worth the paper the deed's printed on." "Then what about her?" Wilkes jerked his head toward Zara, and she felt her blood turn to ice. 23 years of life had not prepared Zara for this moment. She'd known her father's gambling was destructive, but never had she imagined he'd stoop this low. "No, Pa, you can't." Zara stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The dozen or so men in the saloon turned to look at her, their eyes trailing over her figure with undisguised interest. Josiah didn't meet her gaze. His hands shook as he pulled a folded document from his pocket, a crude contract he drafted earlier that day, when the liquor first whispered its vile suggestions in his ear. "My daughter," he said, dropping the paper onto the pile of coins and bills. "She's a hard worker. Cooks and cleans better than any woman in the territory, worth more than this whole pot." Thomas Calloway's expression remained unchanged, but something shifted in his eyes as he glanced at Zara, then back to his cards. "I'm not interested in owning people, Turner." "Ain't ownership," Josiah protested. "Just servitude to pay my debts. 1 year of service." Zara felt bile rise in her throat. The room seemed to spin around her as she realized just how far her father had fallen. "I'll take that bet," Wilkes said eagerly, licking his lips as he leered at Zara. "So will I," added another player, a cattle merchant with meaty hands and yellow teeth. Calloway's jaw clenched. He glanced at Zara again, something unreadable crossing his face. "I'm in." The final cards were dealt. Each man revealed his hand. Wilkes cursed, throwing down a pair of kings. The cattle merchant had 3 of a kind. Josiah Turner smiled drunkenly as he revealed a straight. "Looks like my luck's turning." Then Calloway laid down his cards. 4 queens stared up from the table. The saloon fell silent. Josiah's face crumpled as he watched Calloway rake in the money with one hand. "The girl's yours," Josiah said, his voice hollow. "The contract says, I know what it says." Calloway picked up the crude document. Without taking his eyes off Josiah, he slowly tore the paper into pieces, letting them flutter onto the table like dead leaves. "I don't want your daughter, Turner." Zara's relief was short-lived. "But I will take your ranch," Calloway continued. "Worthless or not, it's time you paid your debts." Josiah Turner staggered to his feet. "You can't take my land. It's all we got left. You bet it and lost." Calloway's voice was steel. "I'll be by tomorrow morning to claim it. You and your daughter can be gone by then, or you can work for me. Your choice." Zara watched her father stumble toward the door, too drunk to stand straight, too broken to fight back. Without thinking, she approached the table, anger and desperation making her bold. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "please. That ranch is all we have left of my mother. It's our home." Calloway stood, and Zara realized just how tall he was. His shadow seemed to engulf her as he looked down, those green eyes studying her face. "Your father's been betting away pieces of that ranch for months, Miss Turner. Most of it already belongs to men in this room." He gestured around the saloon. "I'm just claiming what's left." "Then let me work for you," she said quickly. "I'll earn it back." A murmur spread through the saloon. Calloway's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or surprise at her boldness. "That's not necessary," he said. "Please." Zara hated the desperation in her voice, but she had nowhere else to turn. "I'll work harder than any man you could hire. I know that land. I know how to make it thrive again." Calloway considered her for a long moment. "1 year," he finally said. "You work for me for 1 year and I'll let you stay on the ranch. But your father leaves tomorrow. I won't have a drunk gambling away what's mine." The bargain was harsh but fair. More than fair given the circumstances. Zara nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Be ready at dawn," Calloway said, turning back to collect his winnings. "We have work to do." Zara hurried out of the saloon, following her father's unsteady figure down the dusty main street of Cimarron. The sun had fully set now, and the spring night was cool against her hot cheeks. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Tomorrow would bring a new life, one she hadn't chosen, but one she would face with the same determination that had carried her through every hardship until now. Thomas Calloway might own her ranch, but he would soon learn that Zara Turner wasn't a possession to be won or lost in a card game. Dawn broke over the Turner ranch with golden fingers of light illuminating the sorry state of what had once been a promising homestead. The small, 2-room cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, its weathered boards in need of repair. The corral fence sagged in places, and weeds had overtaken the once tended garden. Zara had spent the night packing her father's meager belongings and helping him sober up enough to understand what had happened. By morning, Josiah Turner had progressed from denial to anger to a bone-deep shame that made him unable to look his daughter in the eye. "You don't have to do this, Zara," he said for the 10th time as she handed him a cup of coffee. "We can leave together, head to California." "With what money, Pa?" Zara asked quietly. "Besides, I made a deal. I'm the one who got us into this mess. It should be me staying behind." Zara didn't bother to respond. They both knew Calloway would never agree to that arrangement. Her father had proven himself unreliable too many times. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Zara stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Thomas Calloway rode toward them on a magnificent black stallion, his tall figure straight-backed and imposing. Behind him came a wagon driven by an older Mexican man. "That's Manuel Garcia," Josiah murmured, joining her on the porch. "Used to work the Calloway spread over by Santa Fe. Good man." The knowledge that Calloway owned another ranch surprised Zara, though it shouldn't have. The man had the bearing of someone accustomed to wealth and responsibility. Why he'd want their struggling piece of land was a mystery, but not one she had time to solve at the moment. "Miss Turner," Calloway tipped his hat as he dismounted. His gaze moved past her to her father. "Turner." Josiah nodded stiffly but said nothing. "Manuel will take you to town," Calloway addressed Josiah directly. "The stage for Denver leaves at noon. There's a ticket for you and enough money to get you settled somewhere new." Zara blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected such generosity from the man who'd won their ranch in a card game. Her father looked equally shocked. "I don't need your charity," Josiah began, but Calloway cut him off. "It's not charity. It's insurance that you'll be far enough away not to cause trouble." He turned to Zara. "I've brought supplies and seed. We'll start planting today." His assumption that she'd be ready to work immediately caught Zara off guard, but she nodded. The sooner they began, the sooner she could prove her worth. The next hour passed in a blur of tense goodbyes. Despite everything, Zara found it hard to watch her father climb into the wagon with his single bag of possessions. For all his faults, he was still her father, the man who'd taught her to ride and shoot, who'd sung to her mother in the evenings as they sat on this very porch. "I'll make things right, Zara," Josiah promised as Manuel helped him up. "Somehow I'll earn enough to buy the ranch back." They both knew it was an empty promise, but Zara nodded anyway. "Take care of yourself, Pa." She didn't cry until the wagon disappeared around the bend in the road. Even then, she allowed herself only a moment of weakness before wiping her eyes and turning to face Calloway, who had been unloading supplies from his saddlebags. "I'm ready to start whenever you are, Mr. Calloway." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "We'll begin by assessing what needs to be done. The ranch has good bones, but it's been neglected." "I know," Zara admitted. "After Ma died, Pa couldn't seem to keep up with things, and then the drought came." "Drought's over now," Calloway said, gesturing to the greening hills around them. "Spring rains have been good. With the right care, this land can be productive again." As they walked the property, Zara was surprised by Calloway's knowledge of ranching. He noted the places where erosion had damaged the land, pointed out where new fences would be needed, and discussed crop rotation for the small field where her mother had once grown corn and beans. "You know a lot about farming for a gambler," she observed as they returned to the cabin. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm not a gambler, Miss Turner, at least not professionally." "Then what brought you to that card game last night?" His expression closed off again. "Business. Speaking of which, we should discuss your duties." Zara tensed, remembering the leers of the men in the saloon when her father had offered her as collateral. But Calloway's next words were purely practical. "You'll continue living here in the cabin. I'll take the small room out back that was used for storage. You'll cook and tend to the house, as well as help with the planting and care of the livestock I'll be bringing in next week." "Where will you be when you're not here?" Zara asked. "I have business interests throughout the territory," he replied vaguely. "I'll be coming and going, but when I'm here, I expect the place to be well run." It wasn't that different from what she'd been doing for years, except now she'd be doing it for a stranger instead of her family. A stranger who held her future in his hands. "I understand," she said. "And after a year, if I've fulfilled my part of the bargain," Calloway met her gaze directly, "then we'll renegotiate, maybe a share of the profits if you're as good as you claim to be." It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it was better than nothing. Zara nodded, determined to prove herself indispensable. One way or another, she would reclaim her family's land. The first week passed in a blur of backbreaking work. Calloway wasn't an easy man to please, but neither was he cruel. He worked alongside Zara from sunup to sundown, repairing fences, clearing fields, and planting the first crops of the season. To Zara's surprise, he was knowledgeable about farming techniques she'd never heard of, speaking of crop rotation and soil enrichment methods that seemed foreign but promising. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, too exhausted to move after a day spent digging irrigation ditches. Calloway took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I grew up on a farm in Virginia, before the war." It was the first personal detail he'd shared, and Zara seized on it eagerly. "You fought in the war between the states," A shadow crossed his face. Yes, for the Confederacy. No. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. Zara let it drop, but she filed the information away. Thomas Calloway was a man with a past, one that had brought him west after the war and given him the skills to see value in a run-down ranch that others considered worthless. On the 8th day, a herd of cattle arrived, along with 3 cowboys to help manage them. Zara watched from the porch as the animals were guided into the newly repaired corral. 30 head, Calloway explained as he joined her. A small start, but they're good stock. We'll build from here. Zara questioned before she could stop herself. Calloway gave her one of his rare, fleeting smiles. Figure of speech. My ranch, your labor. Despite his clarification, something had shifted between them. As days turned into weeks, Calloway began consulting her on decisions, valuing her knowledge of the land and the local climate. They developed a rhythm, working together during the day and sharing quiet meals in the evenings. Zara found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the way the sun had deepened his tan, how his hands, though calloused from work, moved with unexpected gentleness when treating an injured calf or planting delicate seedlings. He was a contradiction, hard yet fair, distant yet increasingly present in a way that made her pulse quicken when their hands accidentally touched or when she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. By midsummer, the ranch was showing signs of recovery. The crops were growing tall in the fields, the cattle were fattening on the lush grass of the pasture, and the cabin had been repaired and even expanded with a proper kitchen added to the back. Zara had just finished hanging laundry one sweltering July afternoon when she noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. Visitors were rare, the ranch being a good distance from town. She shaded her eyes, trying to make out who was approaching. As the riders drew closer, Zara's heart sank. She recognized Sam Wilkes at the lead, with 3 rough-looking men behind him. Wilkes had made no secret of his interest in her during her infrequent trips to town for supplies, his comments growing increasingly bold despite her clear rejections. Calloway emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of approaching horses. He moved to stand beside Zara, his presence reassuring. "Calloway," Wilkes called out as he reined in his horse. "Fine place you've made here. Hardly recognized it. What can I do for you, Wilkes?" Calloway's voice was cold, his posture tense. Wilkes dismounted, his gaze sliding to Zara. "Just being neighborly. Thought I'd check how my investment is doing." "Investment?" Zara questioned, looking between the 2 men. Wilkes grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Didn't he tell you, sweetheart? Your pa owed me money too, sold me a piece of this ranch months ago, eastern corner by the creek." Zara turned to Calloway, who didn't deny the claim but whose eyes had hardened to flint. "That claim was settled," Calloway said evenly. "I bought you out last month." "The paperwork's filed with the county clerk." Wilkes's smile faltered. "Now that's where we have a disagreement. I don't recall signing any papers. Your signature isn't required when you use land as collateral for a loan and then default." Calloway's hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to the gun at his hip. "The creek and everything east of it belongs to the Turner Ranch now. My ranch." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Zara held her breath, watching as Wilkes's men shifted uneasily in their saddles. "Seems mighty convenient," Wilkes said, his voice dangerously soft. "You swooping in, taking over this place, keeping the pretty Miss Turner for yourself." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, both from anger at being spoken of as property and from the implication about her relationship with Calloway. "Miss Turner works for me," Calloway stated firmly. "And this conversation is over. I suggest you leave my property, Wilkes." For a moment, Zara thought Wilkes might challenge him. The saloon owner's hand twitched near his gun, and his eyes burned with malice. But something in Calloway's steady gaze must have given him pause. "This ain't over," Wilkes spat, remounting his horse. "That creek water feeds my cattle. I'll be back with the sheriff." "Do that," Calloway replied calmly. "I'm sure Sheriff Davis will be interested in reviewing all your outstanding loans and property claims." The implied threat hung in the air. With a final glare, Wilkes wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following close behind. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Calloway's rigid posture relax slightly. Zara turned to him, questions burning in her mind. "Is it true? Did my father sell pieces of our land?" Calloway nodded grimly. Bit by bit over the past year, to Wilkes, to the banker Johnson, to anyone who'd extend him credit for his gambling. The revelation shouldn't have surprised her, yet it still stung. "And you've been buying it all back?" "Yes." "Why?" Zara asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why go to all that trouble for land you won in a card game?" Calloway was silent for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost to himself. "Because some things shouldn't be broken apart. This ranch has good water, fertile soil. It deserves to be whole." There was something he wasn't saying, something in the way he avoided her gaze that made Zara wonder if there was more to his interest in the Turner ranch than economics. But before she could press further, he turned away. "Wilkes won't give up easily," he warned. "He's a vindictive man. We should be prepared for trouble." The threat hung over the ranch like a storm cloud for the next few days. Zara found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, and Calloway took to making rounds of the property before dawn and after dusk, his rifle always within reach. When trouble came, however, it wasn't in the form they expected. 4 days after Wilkes's visit, Zara awoke to the smell of smoke. She scrambled from her bed, rushing to the window to see flames licking at the far corner of the barn. "Fire!" she screamed, grabbing a shawl and running outside. "Thomas! Fire!" Calloway emerged from his room seconds later, pulling on his shirt as he ran toward the barn. The 3 cowboys who slept in the bunkhouse were already rushing to form a bucket line from the well to the flames. "Get the horses out!" Calloway shouted, disappearing into the smoke-filled building. Zara grabbed buckets and joined the line, passing water from hand to hand as they fought desperately to contain the blaze. The night air was filled with the panicked whinnies of horses and the crackle of burning wood. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of Calloway leading terrified animals to safety, his face blackened with soot, his movements decisive despite the danger. The sight of him vanishing back into the smoke-filled barn for a third time made her heart seize with fear. "Thomas!" She called out, breaking from the line to run toward the building. Just as she reached the barn door, a section of the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash. Zara screamed, certain Calloway had been caught in the cave-in. But seconds later he staggered out, leading the last horse, his prized black stallion. Relief flooded through her, so intense that she nearly collapsed. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him as he released the horse into the corral. "I thought," she began, her voice breaking. His arms came around her, holding her tightly for just a moment before he gently set her away from him. "I'm all right," he assured her, though his voice was hoarse from smoke. "But we need to save what we can." By dawn, the fire was out, but half the barn was destroyed. The animals were safe, as was most of the feed, but it was a devastating blow to the progress they'd made. As Zara handed Calloway a cup of coffee, her hand still trembling from exhaustion and fading adrenaline, he examined a blackened piece of wood. "This was deliberate," he said quietly. "I found a broken lantern by the haystack. Someone wanted to make sure it would catch quickly." "Wilkes," Zara guessed, Calloway nodded grimly. Most likely, though he'll have made sure he has an alibi. What do? We rebuild, he said simply. And we stay alert. This isn't over. The fire changed something between them. Perhaps it was the moment she'd embraced him, or the fear she'd felt when she thought he might be lost in the flames. Whatever the cause, the careful distance Calloway had maintained began to crumble. They worked side by side rebuilding the barn, and in the evenings, he began to share stories of his life before coming west. She learned that he'd grown up on a prosperous farm in the Shenandoah Valley, that he'd fought for the Union despite his Virginia roots, and that he'd come west after the war to escape memories too painful to face. In turn, Zara told him about her mother, a schoolteacher who'd fallen in love with Josiah Turner despite her family's objections, who'd brought books and music and dreams to their small cabin. She always believed this land had potential, Zara said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Even when the crops failed or the winters were harsh, she said we just needed to be patient, to work with the land instead of against it. She was right, Calloway Thomas, as she'd begun to call him, replied. You have her vision and her determination. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Zara felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. It had been happening more and more lately, this silent communication between them, this growing awareness of each other that went beyond employer and employee. The rebuilding of the barn took nearly 3 weeks, during which time there were no further incidents. Zara began to hope that perhaps Wilkes had given up, or that the sheriff had warned him against further trouble. Her hope was shattered the day Thomas rode into town to meet with the banker about expanding their cattle herd. Zara was tending the garden when she heard horses approaching. Looking up, she expected to see Thomas returning early. Instead, she saw Wilkes and 2 of his men. Fear coursed through her, but she stood her ground as they dismounted. The ranch hands were out with the cattle on the far side of the property. She was alone. Miss Turner, Wilkes greeted her with a mock tip of his hat. Beautiful day, isn't it? What do you want, Mr. Wilkes? Zara asked, her hand tightening around the garden hoe she held. Just a friendly visit. He stepped closer, his smile not reaching his eyes. I've been thinking about our situation here. Seems to me there's a simple solution to this land dispute. And what would that be? Marriage. He said the word like he was offering her a gift. You and me joining our interests. My business is in town, your ranch out here. It's a natural fit. Zara didn't bother to hide her disgust. This isn't my ranch anymore, as you well know, and I would never marry you, Mr. Wilkes. His smile faded. Is it because of Calloway? You think he cares about you? He laughed, a harsh sound. He's using you, girl, just like he uses everyone. Once he's built this place back up, he'll sell it for a profit and move on. You don't know him, Zara replied, though a seed of doubt tried to take root in her mind. It was true that Thomas had never spoken of the future, never clarified what would happen after her year of service was complete. I know men like him, Wilkes insisted. Opportunists, drifters. Did he tell you why he really came to Cimarron? Zara remained silent, unwilling to engage but unable to walk away. He came looking for a man, Wilkes continued. A killer named Jenkins who shot Calloway's brother in a dispute over a mining claim in Colorado. Tracked him all the way here, only to find out Jenkins had moved on, but not before losing a fortune at my tables. He smiled again. That's why he was in that poker game, looking for information. Your ranch was just a bonus. The revelation struck Zara like a physical blow. Thomas had never mentioned a brother, never spoken of a quest for revenge. Yet it explained his sudden appearance in their small town, his willingness to gamble for high stakes despite claiming not to be a professional gambler. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Wilkes shrugged. Believe what you want. But ask yourself why a man like Calloway, with money and connections, would waste his time on a run-down ranch in the middle of nowhere. Ask yourself why he keeps riding out for days at a time, coming back with no explanation. It was true that Thomas occasionally left the ranch, saying only that he had business elsewhere. Zara had never questioned it, respecting his privacy just as he respected hers. I think you should leave, she said, lifting the hose slightly. Wilkes laughed again but took a step back. Think about my offer, Miss Turner. It stands until the end of the month. After that. He left the threat hanging in the air as he and his men remounted their horses. Zara watched them ride away, her mind churning with questions and doubts. By the time Thomas returned that evening, she had worked herself into a state of quiet fury. Did you have a brother? She demanded as soon as he entered the cabin. Thomas froze in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Yes. Was he killed over a mining claim in Colorado? His jaw tightened. Who have you been talking to? Is it true? Zara pressed, needing to hear it from him. Thomas set down his saddlebags and removed his hat, his movements deliberate, as if buying time to formulate his response. Yes, he finally admitted. My younger brother William was shot 3 years ago by a man named Jenkins. I've been tracking him since. And that's why you came to Cimarron, to find this Jenkins. Initially, yes. Zara felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. So Wilkes was right. You never cared about this ranch. It was just a convenient cover while you hunted a killer. Thomas's expression hardened. Wilkes was here, while I was gone. Answer me, Thomas. Was everything rebuilding the barn, buying back the land, working alongside me, was it all just a way to establish yourself here while you searched for Jenkins? No. His denial was immediate and forceful. When I first arrived, yes, I was only interested in finding Jenkins. But when I won this ranch, when I saw what it could be, what you were willing to do to save it. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. My plans changed, and Jenkins. Are you still hunting him? Thomas was silent for a long moment. I received word last month that he was seen in Arizona territory. That's where I've been going on my trips away from the ranch. The confirmation of Wilkes's claims hit Zara harder than she'd expected. Not because Thomas was seeking justice for his brother that she could understand, but because he'd kept it from her, letting her believe he was committed to the ranch when his true purpose lay elsewhere. Were you going to tell me? Or were you planning to vanish one day once you found him? I don't know, Thomas admitted, and the honesty in his voice was somehow worse than any lie would have been. At first, revenge was all that mattered, but lately, he moved toward her, stopping just out of reach. Lately, I've been questioning what I really want. This ranch, the work we've done together, it's become important to me. You've become important to me. The admission hung in the air between them, too significant to be casually acknowledged, too tentative to be fully trusted. Wilkes asked me to marry him today, Zara said, watching Thomas's reaction carefully. Said it would resolve our land disputes. Thomas's expression darkened, his hands clenching at his sides. And what did you tell him? I refused, of course. But he made me realize that I don't know what happens after my year is up. Will you sell the ranch? Will you leave to continue your hunt? Where does that leave me? I don't know, Thomas repeated, and Zara could see the conflict in his eyes. I've spent 3 years with one purpose, finding Jenkins. I can't simply abandon that quest, not when I'm so close. But I also can't deny what's happened here, what's grown between us. He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Zara allowed him to take it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, familiar now after months of working side by side. I need time, Zara, to finish what I started, or to find a way to let it go. Can you understand that? Part of her wanted to say no, to demand certainty, commitment. But she saw the genuine struggle in his eyes, heard the plea in his voice. And despite her anger and confusion, she found she couldn't simply dismiss the connection they'd formed. "I understand needing closure," she said carefully, "but I won't wait forever in limbo. I need to know that this ranch, my home, has a future, that I have a future here." Thomas nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "When I return from my next trip, we'll talk about the future, all of it. I promise." It wasn't the declaration of love or commitment she might have hoped for, but it was honest. And in that moment, honesty was what Zara needed most. The next morning, Thomas departed for Arizona territory. The goodbye was awkward, laden with unspoken words and uncertain expectations. Zara watched him ride away, wondering if he would return as promised, or if the pull of his vendetta would prove stronger than whatever feelings he had for her and the ranch they'd rebuilt together. Days stretched into weeks with no word from Thomas. Zara threw herself into the work of the ranch, grateful for the 3 hands who remained to help with the cattle and the increasingly abundant crops. The land was responding to their care, yielding a harvest that exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. A month after Thomas's departure, Sheriff Davis rode out to the ranch with news that set Zara's heart racing. "There was a shootout in Tucson," he reported as they sat at her kitchen table. "Between Calloway and a man fitting Jenkins's description. Both were wounded from what I hear." "How badly?" Zara asked, her throat tight with fear. The sheriff shook his head. "Don't know the details, just that neither was killed outright. Thought you should know since Calloway's been running things here." After the sheriff left, Zara paced the cabin, torn between her responsibilities to the ranch and her growing concern for Thomas. The uncertainty was agonizing, not knowing if he was recovering or dying, if he'd found the closure he sought, or if his quest had ended in tragedy. 3 more days passed before a rider approached the ranch in the late afternoon. Zara was bringing in the laundry when she spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Shading her eyes, she felt her heart leap as she recognized Thomas's black stallion. But as the horse drew nearer, she realized with a shock that it was not Thomas in the saddle. The rider was smaller, hunched forward as if in pain. For a wild moment, she feared it might be Jenkins himself, coming to finish what he'd started by eliminating anyone connected to Thomas. She ran inside for the shotgun Thomas had taught her to use, then returned to the porch to wait, the weapon loaded and ready. The rider approached slowly, and as he came into clear view, Zara gasped. It was Thomas, but so changed she'd barely recognized him. His face was gaunt, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw. His left arm was bound in a sling, and he rode with the stiffness of a man in considerable pain. "Thomas!" She set aside the shotgun and ran to help him dismount. He nearly collapsed against her, his weight almost sending them both to the ground. "I found him," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's over." With the help of one of the ranch hands, Zara managed to get Thomas into the cabin and onto her bed. His shirt was stiff with old blood, and when she carefully removed it, she found a crudely bandaged wound in his left shoulder. "The doctor in Tucson took the bullet out," Thomas explained as she cleaned the wound. "Said I should rest for at least 2 weeks before traveling, but I couldn't. I needed to get back." "You could have died on the trail," Zara scolded, though her hands remained gentle as she applied fresh bandages. "Wouldn't be the first time I cheated death," he replied with a weak attempt at humor. Then, more seriously, "Jenkins is dead. He drew on me when I confronted him about William. I was faster, but not fast enough to avoid his shot entirely." Zara sat back, studying his face. Despite the pain evident in the lines around his eyes and mouth, There was something different about him, a lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Did it bring you peace?" she asked softly. "Killing him?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Not the way I expected," he finally answered. "But yes, I can let William rest now, and I can start thinking about the future instead of the past." The words sent a flutter of hope through Zara's chest, but she tempered it with caution. "You need to rest. We can talk about the future when you're stronger." He caught her hand as she rose to leave. "Zara, I rode 5 days with a bullet wound because I couldn't bear the thought of you wondering if I'd return. If that doesn't tell you something about my intentions, I don't know what will." The confession, delivered with such simple conviction, brought tears to Zara's eyes. She squeezed his hand gently, then withdrew to let him sleep. Over the next 2 weeks, as Thomas recovered his strength, they spoke at length about their shared future. He had indeed found closure in the confrontation with Jenkins, though not in the way he'd anticipated. Facing his own mortality had clarified his priorities, making him realize that revenge was a poor substitute for the life he could build with Zara. "I want to make this ranch a success," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His arm was still in a sling, but color had returned to his face, and with it, the quiet confidence she'd come to admire. "Not to sell it, but to live here, with you if you'll have me." Zara studied him, searching for any trace of doubt or reservation. Finding none, she allowed herself to voice the hope she'd been nurturing since his return. "Are you proposing Thomas Calloway?" He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I believe I am, Zara Turner. Though I imagined doing it with a bit more ceremony and a lot less pain in my shoulder." Laughter bubbled up from deep within her, born of joy and relief and the sheer improbability of their journey from that fateful card game to this moment. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss they shared was gentle due to his injury, but it held a promise of passion and commitment that made Zara's heart race. When they finally parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said, his tone serious enough to make her pull back slightly, concerned. "What is it?" "That night in the saloon when your father bet you in that card game." He hesitated, then continued. "I knew before I ever sat at that table that he was in trouble. I'd been watching him gamble away pieces of this ranch for weeks, trying to figure out who held which claims so I could buy them back." Zara frowned, not understanding. "Why would you do that? You didn't even know me then." Thomas took a deep breath. "Because I knew your mother. Years ago, before the war, when she was still a schoolteacher back east, she was kind to me when few others were. When I heard she had married and moved west, I kept track of her from a distance. When I learned of her death, I came to see if her family needed help." The revelation stunned Zara. "You knew my mother. Why didn't you say anything?" "At first, I wasn't sure how to explain my presence without seeming intrusive. Then Jenkins's trail led here and it gave me a reason to stay. By the time I won the ranch, it seemed too complicated to explain." Zara tried to process this new information, this connection to her mother that she'd never suspected. "Did you love her?" she asked, needing to understand the nature of their relationship. Thomas shook his head. "Not romantically. I was very young, and she was my teacher for a brief time. But she defended me when others mocked my interest in books and learning. She encouraged me to look beyond the boundaries others tried to set for me. Her kindness left a mark." Relief mingled with wonder as Zara considered how fate had brought them together, how her mother's influence had extended beyond her death, to bring Thomas into their lives at the moment they needed him most. "So when my father bet me in that card game, I couldn't let anyone else win," Thomas finished for her. I couldn't bear the thought of Rebecca's daughter being treated as property. When I tore up that contract, it wasn't just for show. I wanted you to know from that first moment that I saw you as a person deserving of dignity and choice." Tears filled Zara's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, "for honoring her memory that way." The wedding took place in October, when the aspens in the nearby mountains had turned to gold and the harvest was safely gathered. The ranch hands decorated the yard with lanterns and wildflowers, and the local minister rode out to perform the ceremony. To Zara's surprise and cautious joy, Josiah Turner returned for the occasion. He was sober, working as a clerk in a Denver mercantile, and carrying the weight of his past mistakes with humble acknowledgement. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he told Zara the night before the wedding, "but I want you to know I'm trying to be the man your mother believed I could be." Zara embraced him, finding that the anger and hurt she'd carried had faded, replaced by a hope that he might finally find his way. "She always believed in second chances, Pa. So do I." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Zara wore a dress of pale blue silk that Thomas had ordered from Santa Fe, with wildflowers in her hair. Thomas stood tall and straight, fully recovered from his wound, his green eyes never leaving hers as they exchanged vows. "I take you, Zara, to be my wife," he said, his voice clear and steady. "To share in your dreams for this land, to honor your strength and determination, to love you through all seasons." Zara's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "I take you, Thomas, to be my husband. To walk beside you in our new beginning, to create the home my mother envisioned, to love you with the same courage you've shown me." As the minister pronounced them man and wife, Zara felt the past and future merge into a perfect present, the ranch her mother had loved, now thriving under their joint care. The man who had won her in a card game, now bound to her by choice and love rather than chance or obligation. That night, as they stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, Thomas pulled a folded document from his pocket. "A wedding gift," he said, handing it to her. "I had the lawyer in town draw it up last week." Zara unfolded the paper, scanning its legal language with growing amazement. It was a deed to the ranch, with both their names listed as equal owners. "I won this land in a game of chance," Thomas explained, "but what we've built here together is no accident, no lucky draw. You've earned your place as my partner in every sense." Zara looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain the emotion. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the gratitude, passion, and commitment she felt. His answer was a kiss that spoke of belonging, of home found after long wandering, of a future bright with possibility. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Calloway ranch. The bitter dispute with Wilkes was finally resolved when the man overreached in his business dealings and was forced to sell his saloon and leave the territory. The drought that had once nearly destroyed the Turner ranch became a distant memory as innovative farming techniques and careful management turned the property into one of the most productive in the county. In the spring of 1888, their first child was born, a son they named William, after Thomas's lost brother. 2 years later came a daughter, Rebecca, bearing her grandmother's name and, Zara liked to think, her spirit as well. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Thomas and Zara would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple and gold. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked one such evening, 10 years after their wedding. "Settling here instead of continuing your travels," Thomas smiled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Not for a moment. This land, this life we've built, it's more than I ever dared hope for." Zara leaned into his embrace, thinking of the unlikely path that had brought them together: a desperate father's wager, a stranger's unexpected compassion, a torn contract that had set in motion a love story neither could have imagined. "My mother used to say that sometimes what looks like the end of everything is really just the beginning," she murmured. "Wise woman, your mother," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I wish I could have known her better." "She would have approved of you," Zara assured him. "Not just because you saved her daughter from a terrible fate, but because you saw the value in this land when others didn't. Because you helped me make her dream for this place come true." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Zara reflected on how a single night in a smoky saloon had changed the course of her life. Her father's greatest mistake had led, through a winding and often difficult path, to her greatest happiness. Thomas Calloway had won her in a game of chance, torn up the deed that would have bound her to servitude, and instead offered her a partnership based on respect and eventual love. Together, they had transformed a failing ranch into a thriving home, proving that sometimes what begins with desperate gamble can end with the surest bet of all.